of Boston Media Theory. I'm Marcus Breen, and this is a program where we talk about various issues to do with media and communication theory, ideas from practitioners, from researchers, sometimes consultants, people working in the field, outside the field, all over the place. And today and this week, tonight, I'm delighted to welcome Moya Bailey from Northeastern University. Welcome, Moya.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I wanted you to just tell us the name or the title of the department you work in at Northeastern, because it's a slight convoluted title.
It is. It's the Department of Culture, Societies, and Global Studies, and I also work in the program of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies.
That's all in the one department?
Department and program, so half and half.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's important, I think, about that, and why I wanted to introduce you to the viewers of this program, is because you work across, I think, a number of fields, and of course this is the era of intersectionality. And I suspect that the title of the department and the program that you're in some ways reflects the challenges that have been thrown up by intersectionality. Would that be right?
That would be absolutely correct. One of the things that the department hopes to do is to bring study that is intersectional across different cultures and societies around the world. So we actually have a program in African American studies, a program in Asian studies, and trying to get students to think across these sort of regional divisions, ethnic divisions that exist in our world, and what does it mean for these different fields to talk to one another is something that's pretty unique about our program.
It would seem so, and it would also suggest to me that there's inevitably some challenges about what have been, at least in academic life, the kind of disciplinary boundaries that people often have trouble letting go of.
Exactly, and I think that's what's beautiful about the digital humanities itself, is that it's one of the ways that we get to really explore what happens when we bring our disciplinary training to an interdisciplinary space. So when we get together, there's a lot more that we can accomplish and a lot more that we see when we have a conversation across these particularly long-standing siloed university institutions.
Well, that's interesting. I haven't thought of digital humanities in that way before, as sort of resolving some of those silo issues. And we'll talk about digital humanities again in a minute. I want to remind both myself and the viewers, and also tell you that you first came to my attention when I was looking at digital humanities and trying to get my head around it, as many people are doing, still doing. And I came across this Transforming Digital Humanities article. That's the headline or the title of it, and then the subtitle is Writing and Research Autoethnography of Digital Digital Humanities and Feminist Ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And I've mangled that title a bit. I'm having trouble reading my screen, but Writing and Research Autoethnography of Digital Humanities and Feminist Ethics.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on in that title.
There is.
But let's get to this question of digital humanities in more detail. How does digital humanities bring those sort of very complicated questions of autoethnography, which you might have to tell us about as well?
Sure.
Define that for us, because I think that's a fascinating and exciting new field. But how does digital humanities sort of work with trying to elaborate on and recognise the complexity of these intersections?
Sure. So the way that I describe digital humanities is asking digital questions of humanities studies. So the kinds of questions that people have that they can't necessarily answer very easily without some digital engagement or some help. So one of the classic studies is work by Lauren Klein, who's another digital humanist, who looked at Thomas Jefferson's papers and looked at a particular figure who was an enslaved person working for Jefferson, and couldn't really find references to him in the body of Jefferson's work because he had several different names. And that wasn't something that she could easily just find in an index in the digital archive of all the papers. So she created a script that really went through all of the digital material and found all the instances and different spellings and different ways that Jefferson referred to James Hemings. And so she was really able to uncover this really rich way that he had been influential through Thomas Jefferson's life that we wouldn't have had access to because nobody could have done that by hand without the aid of this computer script. And then I also think about digital humanities as asking questions of this digital age, asking humanities questions of how is digital technology, how is the internet, et cetera, shaping the way that we interact as humans. And so bringing some of that humanist inquiry to the digital, I think, is one of the ways that we're able to we can get to intersectionality in digital humanities. And part of that looks like working across not just disciplinary divisions, but also the different places that people are located within the university. So a lot of digital humanities projects involve students, faculty, and staff, librarians, all working together to help create a project, which I think is unique in terms of what we generally see in the humanities. You know, we tend to, as humanists, work by ourselves, create single monographs, and this is really an opportunity for people to bring their different expertise together to answer and create a project that's more accessible to a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, that's a fantastic way of describing it, and it's exciting to think that the way or the influence that digital technologies have influenced humanities to become more collaborative. Certainly my experiences of the lonely researcher and our monographs or our books tend to be single author works. This is this approach that you suggested forces one's hand in a very what I would think of as a very productive way.
Absolutely.
At a time when to be an individual is all well and good, but it's a very lonely time and it's a very dangerous time to not have a sort of space or a place where people can be together and as a result of collaborations.
Exactly, and I think that's also what I was trying to get to in the essay, was really making connections between collaboration, not just across these different university components, but also between the researcher and the people being researched. So part of the article is talking about not thinking of the people you're working with as research subjects, but thinking about them as collaborators as well. So how does that change the way that you think about the research if you are also working with and collaborating with the communities that you're interested in? And so that, to me, is part of the feminist ethic of the project, is addressing some of those hierarchies between researcher and researched. And then also the autoethnography piece is talking about my own experience, the trials and tribulations of trying to make that work, and being honest about where it's easier to make it happen and where it isn't. So taking a look at my own engagement and how I want to continue to have a feminist ethic going forward.
Well, that too is very exciting in the sense in which, just backing up a little, again, you're not positioning yourself as a lone individual removed from others, but in a sense removing the idea of the object of study and thinking about the subject of study, yourself, your own subjectivity, and that of the people with whom you're collaborating. Would that be accurate as well?
Absolutely. And then what kind of project gets created is one that isn't just beneficial to me as somebody who's trying to get tenure, but also is useful to the community, something that they can use or might find beneficial going forward as well.
Absolutely. So in the essay, you use the phrase transformative practices, and this seems to me to pretty much describe some of the processes you've just been talking about in the sort of combination of autoethnography, which is really talking about yourself and your experiences, but immediately, instead of moving towards the sort of individual self-aggrandizement, if you like, moving in the other way, which is towards a collaborative and collective set of concerns that makes that autoethnography more meaningful because it's in relation to other social actors. Would that be, again, pretty accurate?
Yes, and this is also part of a larger initiative within digital humanities. I run I curate the Transform DH Tumblr, which is a space where a lot of different people who are thinking about how do we address some of the areas of DH that are often overlooked, how can we bring those things to the fore? So making sure that when we do digital humanities project, we do consider race, we do consider gender, sexuality, ability, etc., in the types of projects that we're working on, and how do we make sure that projects that perhaps don't often appear to be part of the digital humanities but have digital humanities elements can also be pulled into the conversation. So the way that people are developing some apps to address their communities' issues, those are digital humanities projects to us. And so it's been a collaborative group of, we started out mostly as graduate students, but now we're in various levels of our academic careers, and we've just been sort of keeping this going. So TransformDH is a hashtag as well that we use in lots of different places online, and to sort of signal boost this work that is trying to broaden what counts as digital humanities.
Well, that's great, because one of the negative considerations that I would have towards what might be thought of as one approach to digital humanities has been the computer science-based, mathematicized approach to counting, numeracy and calculation.
Absolutely.
Which is great, as you suggested from your earlier example. Yes, we want to know how many times a particular individual might be mentioned in a set of texts.
Right.
And it's easier for a machine to do that than for you and me and a couple of research assistants. But that then tends to be, in my way of thinking, feeding primarily into a fairly conservative way of claiming that only counting and mathematics has true empirical value, and clearly there's a limit to that.
Yes, yes, and I think that's what's so interesting about Lauren Klein's work, or the way that we do digital humanities, is that the computational piece of it actually allows us to answer other questions, more qualitative questions, and really get to how do we think about Thomas Jefferson, not just as this, important historical figure, but how do we think about his day-to-day interactions with the people that he enslaved? How does that then change or open up our conversation in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do before, because going through that record database is just so tedious that that might be a project that people would leave behind because it's a little bit too onerous to do.
Right, and then also being able to move to this next point I wanted to make, which was really about what you call what is praxis, and you refer to queer feminist praxis. The idea of saying, well, this text is not neutral, this research is not neutral. There is something to actually be said that involves a critical engagement with it in a slightly different way. That seems to be another way, a useful and quite exciting concept that I saw in your article.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I definitely think there's something to be said for how do we actually put this into practice? How do we take our theoretical interests, and how do we then use them to help mobilize a social justice ethic in our research? And for me, that's part of the queer feminist praxis of doing digital humanities. Understanding that the work and the issues that I tend to look at as a researcher have some political impact. And so if they do, how am I making decisions about what project I'm looking at? How am I making decisions about how I frame it? And then what are the repercussions of those decisions?
And the repercussions have probably pretty massive and increasingly massive valiance in the current political context, with at least a national set of political actions that are antipathetic to not only feminism but queer and other forms of other
yes.
Orientation.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that is exciting to me about our position as researchers and academics, is that we do have the ability to use our research to create another narrative, or to challenge some of the ways that things are being represented in popular culture, and we have the resources to back it up with qualitative, quantitative research. And to me, the benefit of doing digital humanities and projects that do have a broad range of people who are collaborating on it means that it is potentially more beneficial to larger groups of people.
And there are also quite small groups of people who are in very precarious places.
Yes.
And you've talked about you know, black transsexuals, for example, and the queer community generally is not always a safe place to be.
Yes.
So it seems to me that this is again quite a unique way of locating yourself as a researcher within a pretty well established and ambitious university.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's something to be said about the way that you see different marginalized groups using digital technology and shaping it in ways that I don't think that the creators of those products ever intended or imagined. So one of the things that I look at is the hashtag Girls Like Us, which was created by Black trans advocate Janet Mock. And using the hashtag, she was able to help a lot of different trans women find each other, people who wouldn't have otherwise been able to know that each other existed, but through this hashtag we're able to create community online and then in the real world. And so to me, that's one of the things that's really exciting when I'm doing my research, is that you see the impact that the digital has had, not just in the digital sphere, but also in the world at large.
Well, absolutely, and it's exciting too, isn't it, in the sense in which you're not only sustaining people in their sexuality, in their personhood, in their identity, but you're using the technology, as you said, maybe in a counterintuitive way, not merely to make money for the Zuckerbergs of this world, or whatever, but to create alliances.
Yes.
And you know, that it really changes the nature and the understanding of digital humanities.
Absolutely.
As well as humanities research. And I'm wondering what happens in an institution like Northeastern with these kinds of projects. I mean, is it generally said, well, welcomed, or are there questions raised about it?
Yeah, no, I'm very fortunate to be at an institution where the digital humanities are really valued. We have a program or a cluster of researchers in the New Lab, which is the group of scholars who are interested in the digital humanities, and we have a very robust sort of project agenda that we're all working on. I'm working with two colleagues who are actually in the School of Communications and Media Design on a project looking at hashtag activism specifically. So looking at some of the hashtags that have been used to bring about racial and gender justice. So that book project is really exciting, and we have a contract with MIT Press for that going forward. So it's been really wonderful to be at an institution where not only is the institution supportive, but I also have other colleagues who are interested in these questions as well.
Well, yeah, that's good to hear, and it's good to know that the academic press is trying to address this as well. We've had a guest here on the program from the MIT commissioning editor and director of the program, in fact, and we had a terrific conversation about the challenges to book publishing. It's one of the fascinating aspects of where we're at as both researchers and media theorists, that that someone like you is working with a very detailed and high energy digital environment, hashtags and the like. What really matters then in terms of career paths and other things is whether or not you have a book.
Yes.
It's a curious contradiction, it seems to me.
It is, and trying to do it in a timely fashion is also a question. When you try to do the work of actually slowing down a little bit to make sure that you're doing a project ethically and collaboratively, you can get a little bit behind in terms of how the media is moving, because the digital space is so fast, and then, you know, getting a book out is a much slower process. So that's something that we're still sort of challenged by. the slow pace of article production in academia, but the very fast pace of digital technology and social media.
Well, absolutely right. I've been struggling with the same thing with some work that I've been doing, and it seems to me that the other aspect is then how do you sort of bring all these things together when there are so many challenges that academics in a sort of progressive working environment should be able to contribute to, and yet all the pressure is on publication and on somewhat removing oneself from where the real action is in order to do the work. It seems to me that the university, the current university and the contemporary university, is in some sort of a hole as far as how to address this.
Yes, and that's one of the challenges that the New Lab has taken up. So we've been working on a white paper to kind of address how do you deal with these digital projects or digital research when it comes to tenure and promotion, so that there's an understanding that people might not have a traditional monograph depending on what kind of project it is that they're working on. Is there room also for an understanding that some things may take longer or may be quicker? How do you judge a website if that's part of the final product of a project versus a traditional monograph? So we've been trying to think through those things, and the question is still on the table.
And it's doubly curious in the sense in which work like you're doing, but also much of work in digital technologies and let's call it hashtag culture, certainly since the emergence of Black Lives Matter, so what's that, 2 or 3 years ago, is about collaboration.
Yes.
It is about people in groups working together. And what's valued in society is understanding how people work together and bring about change. And it's not only progressive and left orientation or even a liberal arts orientation. I think it's fair to say that the movement that brought Donald Trump to power mobilised similar kinds of capacities, which is collective movement around the use of new media and new technologies. I think they've been very effective at that.
Yes.
And so we're in an interesting time, are we not?
Exactly. Exactly, and I think that also speaks to why this work is so important. How do we understand this current moment, this political moment, this cultural moment, and how do the digital humanities help us tease out the specificity of how different people are acting in this moment?
And the wonderful thing about hashtags, at least I can speak for hashtags and Twitter, and I think it probably applies to many other digital platforms, is that the capacity to do incredibly detailed, granulated, fine work is there. I teach a social media class, and one of the things that's wonderful is to be able to just put a hashtag into the homepage of your Twitter account and see everything that comes up around whatever the hashtag might be.
Yes.
And see what people are doing.
Yes.
So that sort of facilitation of research and of gathering information is tremendously valuable.
Absolutely, and it's going to be curious. I mean, just in the time that we've been working on this project, we've gone from 140 characters to 280. So it's going to be interesting for us to see, how does that then shape the way we're going to go forward in our research, and how is it going to shape the way that Twitter is used going forward.
Where do you see your research going, and what is the current state of it, and what do you see the horizon?
Yeah, so with this book, we're working on a chapter that's specifically about hashtags that deal with allyship. So the ways that people who aren't directly affected or harmed by something are trying to lend their voice and support. So we're looking at the hashtag All Men Can, which came out after the Yes All Women hashtags started, and so men talking about what men can do to help stop and prevent rape culture, and what men can do, which I think is pretty important right now in this Me Too moment. We're also looking at hashtags that are related to Black Lives Matter And so all of the different hashtags that have resulted from the names of the different Black men and women who have been killed, and how those hashtags have been able to help mobilize actions on the ground in people's different communities. And so my research is really looking at how this digital moment, how young Black women specifically are using digital media to help shape the way that they're represented in popular culture. The issues of representation continue to come up because people are not represented through media in ways that actually affirm the way that they are. And so part of what I'm curious about is how digital media and social media has opened up a space for people to create their own representations. So what kind of things are people producing for themselves? And so that's my individual book project, looking at how people are using social media to create a new narrative.
And that narrative is dramatically different. I would go so far as to say radical, in the sense in which the legacy media is struggling to find a location and continues to be profitable and do very well,
Yes.
even while this parallel universe of the hashtag and the collaborations around the hashtag also flourishes. It flourishes dramatically. And President Trump has shown that it's it does pretty well. I mean, he's got, what did I see yesterday or something, 48, is it 48? 40.8 million followers.
Yes.
I could probably count mine on one hand. And that's a very large number.
Yes.
And it has, he's a good example, a good bad example, or however you say, of where the alternative media of Twitter, but also other social medias, provides a completely different space that no one really, I think, fully anticipated.
Absolutely.
As a space where political organisation could result from, or where political action would take place.
Absolutely. I mean, that's still the question now. Do his tweets actually represent, binding law? People are still sort of debating, what does it mean that he said something in a tweet? What is the actual actionable nature of making sure that those things come to pass or do not? It's a really unique time that we are in as human beings on this planet.
Well, it is a unique time, Moya, and our time is now up. So our unique half hour together is pretty all over, but I want to thank you very much for your contribution and thank you for your work.
Thank
and
you.
I wish you well in your continuing efforts at Northeastern.
All right,
and
thank
until
you
next
so
time,
much.
Okay, until next time, that's it from Boston Media Theory and from me, Marcus Breen, and we'll see you later. Keep on mediating.
This angle, it all makes a star.
I'm a teacher. Let me tell you what I make. I make learning a privilege, not a chore.
Show up
And frustration, a tool, not an obstacle. I make working hard seem easy and giving up impossible.
And then we're going to turn the lights and everybody look up.
I make an old subject feel like a fresh thought.
Find me one.
What's your reaction? Yeah, exactly.
And unconventional methods
Okay, what else?
common.
Little tadpoles, the frogs, the spiders, this is their world.
There's nothing.
And then they die. Go ahead, go, go, go.
I'm a teacher. I make more.
Here's to the things that can keep us safe. And now, those that we carry with us everywhere will bring us wireless emergency alerts. With the unique sound and vibration, you'll be in the know, wherever you are.